The Carefree Duke. The chandeliers in the grand ballroom of Ashworth House dripped with 1,000 points of light, each glinting off the polished floors where couples spun in a dizzying waltz. Lord Edward, the 5th Duke of Ashworth, leaned against a velvet-clad pillar, a half-empty champagne flute cradled in his long fingers. His gaze, a startling shade of blue, drifted over the assembled company, lingering briefly on a cascade of auburn curls belonging to Lady Eleanor. She caught his eye, a blush rising to her cheeks, and offered a shy smile. Edward returned it, a practiced curve of his lips that promised just enough interest to keep her hopeful, but not so much as to invite a prolonged conversation. He enjoyed these evenings, the easy flirtation, the admiring glances, the effortless charm he seemed to exude. The music, a lilting melody, swirled around him, a pleasant backdrop to the symphony of whispers and rustling silks. Life, for Edward, was a meticulously orchestrated ballet of pleasure. He had inherited the title, the vast estates, and the considerable fortune at a young age, and with it the freedom to indulge his every whim. Responsibility, in the form of managing his tenant farms or reviewing the latest parliamentary bills, was delegated to capable estate managers and sharp-witted solicitors. His primary duty, as he saw it, was to enjoy the fruits of his ancestors' labours. Tonight, however, a familiar shadow threatened to eclipse his merriment. Aunt Agatha, a formidable woman clad in severe black lace, bore down upon him, her expression a thundercloud. He braced himself, taking a fortifying sip of champagne. "Edward," she began, her voice a low growl that somehow cut through the ballroom's din. "Are you quite finished preening over Lady Eleanor?" "Her mother has approached me twice tonight, inquiring after your intentions." Edward suppressed a sigh. "My intentions, dearest aunt, are merely to enjoy the evening, and perhaps, if the opportunity arises, to dance a waltz or two." Aunt Agatha's thin lips pressed into a tighter line. "A waltz, indeed. You are 30 years old, Edward. The Ashworth line needs an heir. The dukedom needs a duchess. The constant parade of eligible young ladies whom you charm and then discard is becoming a tiresome spectacle." He met her gaze, a flicker of defiance in his own. "Is it so tiresome for you, aunt? I find it rather entertaining. And as for an heir, there is ample time." "Ample time?" she scoffed, a brittle laugh escaping her. "Your father was married and had you by your 25th year. The family name, Edward, is paramount. You fritter away your days with card games and horse racing, while the very foundation of your legacy remains unaddressed." Her words, sharp and cold, pricked at his carefully constructed indifference. He knew she meant well, in her own austere way, but her incessant harping grated on his nerves. Marriage, to Edward, felt less like a romantic union and more like a strategic alliance, a duty to be fulfilled at some indeterminate point in the future. The thought of being tethered to one woman, of having to account for his every movement, was anathema. He preferred the freedom of fleeting attachments, the thrill of the chase without the burden of capture. "I shall endeavour to be more mindful of my legacy, aunt," he replied, a hint of sarcasm lacing his tone. He offered her a charming, if insincere, smile. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe Lady Eleanor is looking rather forlorn without a dance partner." He made his escape before she could launch another volley of admonishments. The following afternoon found Edward in a far more agreeable setting, the sprawling gardens of Lord and Lady Harrington, host to one of the season's most anticipated garden parties. The air was warm, fragrant with the scent of roses and damp earth, and alive with the cheerful chatter of London's elite. He arrived fashionably late, as was his custom, his dark blue frock coat a striking contrast against the verdant lawns. His valet had ensured his cravat was impeccably tied, his boots gleaming, and his dark hair perfectly coiffed. He surveyed the scene with a practised ease, his eyes scanning the groups of ladies clustered under parasols, the gentlemen discussing politics by the fountain, and the younger set engaged in a lively game of croquet. It was a familiar tableau, one he had navigated countless times. He spotted several acquaintances, offered a nod here, a brief smile there. The world in these moments felt entirely his oyster. A liveried footman offered him a glass of iced lemonade, which he accepted gratefully. The sun, though not yet at its zenith, cast a pleasant warmth on his face. He strolled along the gravel path, his hands clasped behind his back, enjoying the gentle breeze that rustled through the trees. Then he saw her. She stood near the ornate gazebo, surrounded by a small group of women, her back to him. Her gown, a simple yet elegant shade of emerald green, accentuated her slender figure. Her hair, a rich, deep brown, was swept up in an intricate style, allowing a few rebellious tendrils to escape and curl around her neck. There was an air about her, a quiet dignity, that set her apart from the more effusive, giggling young ladies he usually encountered. He found himself walking towards her, an unconscious pull guiding his steps. It was not the usual predatory curiosity, the fleeting interest in a pretty face. This was different, a subtle stirring, a feeling he couldn't quite place. He wanted to see her face, to discern the expression that accompanied such an intriguing posture. As he drew closer, one of the women turned, catching sight of him. A ripple of recognition and then excitement passed through the group. They parted slightly, revealing her. Her eyes, when they met his, were the colour of warm honey, wide and intelligent, framed by long, dark lashes. There was no simpering shyness, no overt attempt to flirt. Instead, a faint flicker of surprise, quickly replaced by a serene composure, graced her features. She held his gaze for a moment longer than was customary, and in that brief exchange, Edward felt an unfamiliar jolt. The carefully constructed walls around his heart, built high and strong over years of careless indulgence, seemed to waver, just for an instant. He offered his usual charming smile, the one that rarely failed to elicit a flattered blush. "Good afternoon, ladies," he said, his voice smooth and resonant. His gaze, however, remained fixed on her. "I trust you are enjoying this delightful weather." The women twittered in response, some curtsying, others offering effusive greetings. But the woman in emerald green merely offered a small, polite nod. Her lips a soft, natural rose, curved in a faint, almost imperceptible smile. There was an understated elegance about her, a quiet strength that piqued his interest more than any overt display of beauty. "Indeed, Your Grace," one of the younger ladies piped up, her voice breathless. "The gardens are quite splendid today." Edward tore his gaze from the woman for a moment, forcing himself to acknowledge the speaker. "They are, Miss Finch. Lord Harrington has outdone himself." He then turned back to the woman who had captivated his attention. "Forgive me, but I don't believe we've been formally introduced." Before anyone could answer, a booming laugh erupted from behind them. "Edward, you rake! Still charming the ladies, I see." Lord Harrington, a portly gentleman with a booming laugh and an ever-present smile, clapped Edward heartily on the back. Edward managed a polite smile, though he felt a pang of irritation at the interruption. He had been so close to learning her name. "Harrington, always a pleasure," Edward said, recovering his composure. He glanced back at the woman, but she had already melted back into the group, her face now obscured by the bobbing bonnets of her companions. The brief, intriguing connection was severed. He felt a flicker of something akin to disappointment, an emotion he rarely associated with his carefree existence. He spent the next hour engaging in the expected pleasantries, exchanging witty remarks with gentlemen and offering compliments to various ladies. But his eyes kept scanning the crowd, searching for the emerald green gown, the soft honey eyes, the quiet dignity that had so unexpectedly captivated him. The memory of that brief, charged glance lingered, a subtle hum beneath the surface of his carefully maintained indifference. He found himself wanting to know more, a desire that was entirely new and unsettling. The carefree Duke, for the first time in a very long while, felt a tremor of something beyond mere amusement. A glimpse of kindness. The late afternoon sun, now softer, cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Ashworth Manor, dappling the emerald gown of the woman Edward found himself inexplicably drawn to. She had moved away from the more boisterous clusters of guests, her path leading her towards a less frequented rose garden, a secluded nook where the air hung heavy with the scent of damask and moss. Edward, usually a man of immediate action and casual conquest, found himself rooted to the spot, content merely to observe. He watched as she paused beside a stone bench, her attention caught by something near the ground. A small, fluttering movement. A fledgling, no bigger than his thumb, had fallen from its nest, its tiny wings beating in frantic, uncoordinated bursts against the dew-kissed grass. Most would have walked past, perhaps spared a fleeting thought, but the woman in green knelt without hesitation, her silk hem brushing the damp earth. Her movements were gentle, precise. She didn't snatch at the bird, nor did she recoil from its nervous pecking. Instead, she extended a gloved hand, her fingers delicately cupping the vulnerable creature. Edward noticed the utter tenderness in her expression, a softening around her honey-coloured eyes that spoke of profound empathy. She murmured something he couldn't quite discern, a low, soothing sound as she carefully inspected the tiny bird. He saw her brush a stray feather back in her place, her touch as light as a whisper. A gardener, pushing a wheelbarrow laden with clippings, passed nearby, oblivious. The world around her seemed to fade, leaving only her and the fragile life in her palm. It was a tableau of quiet grace, a stark contrast to the superficial chatter and calculated flirtations that defined his usual social sphere. He found himself utterly mesmerized, a strange warmth spreading through his chest, an unfamiliar stirring that transcended mere physical attraction. This was different. This was kindness, unadorned and unbidden. He wanted to approach, to offer assistance, to simply be near that gentle aura. Yet, a peculiar shyness, utterly foreign to his nature, held him captive. His usual confidence, the effortless charm that had disarmed countless women, felt clumsy, inadequate. What would he say? "May I help you with that bird?" It sounded absurd, prosaic. He, Edward, Duke of Ashworth, reduced to a stammering boy by a fallen bird and a woman's quiet compassion. She finally stood, the fledgling still cradled in her hands. Her gaze swept upwards, searching the dense foliage of a nearby oak. He watched as she found the nest, a precarious structure tucked between two sturdy branches. A frown creased her brow, a fleeting shadow of concern. The nest was too high for her to reach. Her eyes then fell upon a low stone wall, sturdy and wide. With a decisive yet still graceful movement, she placed the bird carefully on the wall's broad surface, positioning it near a thick ivy vine that snaked its way up the oak. "Wait here, little one," he imagined her saying, her voice soft and reassuring. She then stepped back, her gaze fixed on the bird, waiting. After a few moments, a larger bird, presumably the parent, swooped down, its cheeping calls urgent. It landed near the fledgling, nudging it gently. The smaller bird, emboldened, fluttered its wings and, with a series of clumsy hops and a final, determined leap, launched itself towards the ivy, scrambling upwards with surprising agility, guided by its parent. A small smile, radiant and genuine, bloomed on her lips. It was a private moment of triumph, shared only with the birds and, unbeknownst to her, with Edward. He felt a smile tug at his own lips, an involuntary response to her quiet joy. The shyness, however, remained. He took a breath, steeling himself. He was a duke, for heaven's sake, not some love-struck stable boy. He straightened his waistcoat, smoothed his cravat, and began to walk towards her, his steps purposeful, but still carrying a hint of hesitation. She turned as he approached, her smile fading slightly, replaced by a polite, almost guarded expression. Her eyes, those intelligent pools of honey, met his, and he felt a jolt, a recognition that went deeper than he could fathom. "Lady Amelia," he managed, his voice a little huskier than he intended. He executed a slight bow, a gesture of respect rather than mere formality. Her chin lifted a fraction. "Your Grace," she replied, her voice soft but clear, like the chime of distant bells. There was no artifice, no exaggerated deference, simply a calm acknowledgement. The air between them shimmered with unspoken things, a delicate tension that was both exhilarating and unnerving. He had intended to make some witty remark, some charming pleasantry about the weather or the roses, but the words caught in his throat. All he could think of was the fledgling and the quiet strength of her hands. I trust you are enjoying the garden," he finally offered, the lameness of the observation echoing in his ears. A faint blush touched her cheeks, but her gaze remained steady. "It is a beautiful garden, Your Grace, and a rather eventful one today, it seems." A hint of amusement played at the corners of her mouth, and he found himself captivated all over again. He wanted to ask about the bird, to comment on her kindness, but something held him back. It felt too personal, too revealing, too soon. Instead, he simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the shared moment. The polite exchange, brief and outwardly innocuous, felt like a momentous event, a tiny crack appearing in the carefully constructed facade of his dukedom. And within that crack, he sensed a future he hadn't known he desired. The forbidden name. The drawing-room air, thick with polished mahogany and languid cigar smoke, usually provided a comforting anchor for Edward's evenings. Tonight, however, the polite murmur of conversation receded, a distant hum against the persistent echo of a soft cheek's curve, the delicate grace of a hand. His steps led him instinctively towards Lord Finch, a man whose encyclopedic grasp of the ton's sprawling genealogies was both a boon and a bane. Finch, a fastidious figure, silver-rimmed spectacles perched precariously, was currently holding forth on the virtues of a new strain of hunting hound. "Finch?" Edward interjected, his voice sharper than intended, severing the detailed discourse. Finch blinked, momentarily adrift. "Your Grace?" "The lady from the gardens today," Edward began, striving for an air of casual inquiry, as if discussing a particularly striking bloom. "The one with the fledgling." Finch's brow furrowed in concentration, his mental ledger flipping pages. "Ah, yes, a captivating creature, wouldn't you agree? So unburdened by artifice." A flicker, unreadable, crossed his eyes. "Lady Amelia, if memory serves." A warmth blossomed within Edward at the sound of her name. "Indeed. And her family?" He attempted a relaxed cadence, but a subtle tremor betrayed his keen interest. Finch's expression subtly tightened. He cleared his throat, adjusting his spectacles. "Her family, Your Grace, is rather prominent." He took a slow sip of sherry, his gaze flitting around the room as if seeking an escape hatch. "She is a Hastings." The name landed like a leaden weight, a funeral bell tolling a harsh truth. A sudden visceral coldness extinguished the burgeoning warmth within Edward. Hastings. The very word was a festering wound in his lineage, a scar etched deep into generations of Ashworths. The feud, a bitter, protracted affair born of ancient land disputes and a scandalous elopement centuries past, was legendary. His grandfather had forbidden any Ashworth from even uttering a Hastings name in polite society, let alone entertaining an association. "Hastings," Edward repeated, the word sour on his tongue. His blood, moments ago alive with an exhilarating current, now seemed to congeal. The vibrant image of Amelia, her eyes sparkling with compassion, her smile a gentle arc, suddenly felt sullied, overlaid by the grim, unyielding weight of ancestral animosity. Finch, sensing the abrupt shift in atmosphere, lowered his voice. "A regrettable situation, naturally, Your Grace. But the enmity between your houses, it truly runs deep." He began wringing his hands, a nervous habit. "I believe her father, the Earl of Blackwood, holds as firm a disapproval of your family as yours once did of his." Edward remained silent. He gazed into the amber liquid in his glass, seeing not the sherry, but the intricate tapestry of duty and expectation that had always defined his existence. He was Edward, Duke of Ashworth, his lineage not merely a title, but a sacred trust. He had always taken immense pride in his family's standing, in the unblemished reputation meticulously safeguarded through generations. Yet, the memory of Amelia's light, genuine laugh now entwined with the heavy chains of his heritage. He had never before considered a woman in this way, not as a pawn in the grand strategic game of high society, nor as a fleeting diversion. Amelia had simply existed, a radiant presence that had ignited something unfamiliar and potent within him. Now, that nascent spark threatened to unleash a conflagration. "It is a pity," Finch ventured, his voice barely a whisper. "She is a charming girl. But a Hastings." He trailed off, the unspoken implications hanging heavily in the air. A pity. The word felt like a paltry understatement, a cruel twist of fate, a malicious jest from the universe. The woman who had, in a single afternoon, awakened a longing he hadn't known existed was the one woman in all of England he was expressly forbidden to pursue. Edward's mind raced, a tumultuous battlefield of warring desires and inflexible duties. He saw his grandfather's stern visage, heard the echoes of his father's admonishments against fraternizing with those people. The very notion of acknowledging an attraction to a Hastings felt like a betrayal, a blemish on the Ashworth name. His position, his title, his very legacy, all were inextricably linked to upholding these ancient, bitter divisions. But then he remembered the tender way she had cradled the fledgling, the deep empathy shining in her eyes. He recalled the unexpected joy that had blossomed within him simply from witnessing her quiet kindness. Was he to extinguish that nascent feeling? To dismiss the most genuine connection he had ever felt, all because of a quarrel centuries old? He gripped his glass tighter, knuckles white. The ballroom, once a stage for effortless charm and calculated conquest, now felt like a cage. He was the Duke of Ashworth, a man of immense power and privilege. Yet in this moment, he felt utterly disarmed. His attraction to Lady Amelia wasn't merely a fleeting fancy. It was a profound tremor beneath the foundations of his carefully constructed life. And the knowledge of her name, the forbidden name, transformed that tremor into a warning rumble of an impending earthquake. He knew, with chilling certainty, that this was not a feeling he could simply ignore or suppress. It was a challenge, a dangerous, exhilarating precipice he now stood upon, gazing into an abyss of forbidden desires and unavoidable consequences. The game had irrevocably changed, and Edward, for the first time in his life, felt a terrifying thrill intertwined with his apprehension. The chandeliers of the Ashworth ballroom dripped with 1,000 points of light, each reflecting the vibrant hues of silks and satins that swirled below. Edward, a dark silhouette against the gilded archway, watched the scene unfold with a detached air, his gaze sweeping over the familiar faces until it snagged on a cascade of dark curls. Amelia. She stood near the musicians, a quiet counterpoint to the boisterous laughter and spirited chatter around her, her gown a simple cream that seemed to glow in the ambient light. He found himself dissecting the easy grace of her posture, the slight tilt of her head as she listened to a matron's anecdote, the genuine smile that briefly touched her lips. A warm hand slipped into the crook of his arm, and a familiar, lilting voice broke his reverie. "Lost in thought, Your Grace, or merely admiring the scenery?" Lady Beatrice's eyes, the colour of moss after a spring rain, sparkled with an almost predatory amusement. She was a vision in sapphire blue, her décolletage daringly low, drawing admiring glances from across the room. Edward offered a polite, if somewhat stiff, smile. "Merely observing, Lady Beatrice. It is a splendid gathering." He subtly shifted, his attention already drifting back to the woman across the room. Beatrice, ever perceptive, followed his gaze. "Ah, Lady Amelia Hastings. Quite striking, isn't she? So unburdened by artifice." Her tone was light, but there was a subtle edge to it, a hint of something sharp beneath the polished surface. Though one does wonder about her connections. The veiled insinuation struck a nerve. Edward felt a flicker of annoyance, quickly suppressed. "Her connections are well known, Lady Beatrice," he stated, his voice even. "As are ours." The unspoken chasm between the Ashworths and the Hastings was a chasm he was forbidden to bridge. Yet the knowledge only seemed to deepen the ache within him, a strange yearning for what was prohibited. He steered the conversation to a safer topic, discussing the latest political machinations, but his eyes continued to seek Amelia out. Their glances met once, across the crowded expanse of polished floor and dancing couples. It was a fleeting connection, a spark of recognition in the depths of her dark eyes that mirrored the turmoil in his own. She offered a small, almost imperceptible nod, a courtesy that felt like a secret handshake between them, before turning her attention back to her companion. Days later, the crisp autumn air invited a stroll through Hyde Park. Edward, feigning an interest in the changing foliage, found himself on a path less frequented by the fashionable set, yet one that offered a certain solitude. He knew with a certainty that was both exhilarating and dangerous that Amelia often chose this very path for her morning constitutional. And there she was, just ahead, her parasol a delicate bloom against the backdrop of ochre and russet leaves. His heart gave an unbidden lurch, a rhythm both urgent and familiar. He quickened his pace, ensuring their paths would intersect with a natural ease. "Lady Amelia," he greeted, his voice a low timbre. He had carefully modulated it, aiming for casual politeness, yet it felt charged with an electricity he couldn't quite contain. She turned, her movements fluid and graceful, a faint blush rising on her cheeks. "Your Grace." Her voice was soft, melodic, and carried a subtle tremor he recognized as his own. "A beautiful morning for a walk." "Indeed," Edward replied, falling into step beside her. The scent of fallen leaves mingled with a delicate floral fragrance he now associated with her. "The park is particularly charming this time of year." They walked in comfortable silence for a few moments, the air between them thick with unspoken words and burgeoning emotions. The gentle crunch of leaves underfoot was the only sound breaking the spell. "I confess," Amelia began, her gaze fixed on a distant oak, "I find myself drawn to the quiet corners. The bustle of society can be overwhelming." Edward understood perfectly. "There is a certain honesty in solitude, isn't there? A reprieve from the expectations." He risked a glance at her, catching the slight curve of her lips. Their conversation was brief, constrained by the unspoken rules that governed their world. They discussed the weather, the changing seasons, the merits of a particular novel. Each word, however innocuous, felt imbued with a deeper meaning, a coded message exchanged between two people who were not supposed to be speaking at all. Their eyes met more frequently, lingering for moments that stretched into eternities, revealing a shared understanding, a mutual yearning that defied their family's bitter legacy. As they neared a more populated stretch of the path, Amelia paused. "I must take my leave, Your Grace. My companion will be wondering." Her tone was regretful, a mirror of his own. "Of course, Lady Amelia," Edward managed, his voice a little hoarser than he intended. He offered a slight bow, a formal gesture that felt entirely inadequate. He watched her walk away, her figure receding amidst the trees, a profound sense of loss settling over him. These stolen moments, these brief, charged encounters, were both a torment and a balm. They were dangerous, forbidden, and utterly irresistible. Each one chipped away at the carefully constructed walls he had built around his heart, threatening to expose the very core of his duty and his desire. The Ashworth and Hastings feud had never felt so distant, so irrelevant, in the face of the undeniable pull he felt toward Amelia. The weight of duty. The chandeliers of Lady Danbury's ballroom sparkled, casting a golden haze over the whirling couples. Edward, a glass of champagne in hand, offered a charming smile to Lady Beatrice, whose laughter, high and tinkling, was swallowed by the orchestra's crescendo. He complimented her gown, flirted with practiced ease, and even managed a witty retort to her father's rather dull anecdote about the price of oats. Yet, as he led her in a waltz, her hand light in his, he found his gaze drifting, seeking a quiet corner, a face that wasn't there. The vibrant colours of the room seemed muted, the music a distant hum. Each social interaction, once a source of genuine amusement, now felt like a performance, a hollow charade he was compelled to maintain. He attended soirees, card games, and racing events, immersing himself in the familiar rhythm of his old life. He rode with Lord Ashworth, his hunting companion, discussing the merits of a new retriever, and spent an afternoon at Tattersall's, feigning interest in a bay mare. He even flirted, perhaps a little too enthusiastically, with the vivacious Miss Fitzwilliam, whose bright eyes and quick wit usually captivated him. But beneath the surface of his jovial facade, a persistent image lingered. Amelia, her quiet strength, the hint of a smile in her eyes, the way her hair caught the sunlight in Hyde Park. Her absence from these glittering events was a tangible presence, a silence that resonated louder than the most boisterous conversation. One crisp afternoon, as Edward prepared to leave for a hunt, Aunt Agatha intercepted him in the great hall. She stood by the tall, arched window, her silhouette framed against the weak autumn light, her posture as unyielding as ever. "Edward," she began, her voice a low thrum that always commanded attention. "We need to speak." He braced himself. "Aunt Agatha, I'm just on my way to further indulge in frivolous pursuits, I have no doubt," she finished, her gaze sharp, piercing. "Your father, bless his memory, would never have neglected his responsibilities as you are doing. The dukedom needs an heir, Edward. It has been 2 years since you came into the title, and still you dally." Edward sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Aunt, I assure you I am perfectly aware of my duties." "Are you?" She stepped closer, her silk gown rustling softly. "Because from where I stand, you are merely postponing the inevitable. Lady Eleanor is a suitable match. So is Miss Davenport, though her dowry is somewhat modest. The point is, Edward, you must choose. The lineage, the land. The very name of Beaumont rests on your shoulders. You cannot afford to be distracted by whims." Her emphasis on whims was subtle yet potent, and Edward felt a prickle of unease. Had she noticed his subtle shift in demeanour, his sudden inexplicable aloofness from his usual female companions? He hoped not. Later that week, at a rather stuffy dinner at Lord Penhaligon's, Edward found himself cornered by Lord Finch, a fastidious man whose knowledge of the Tun's genealogies was as extensive as his nervous twitch. Lord Finch, who had just finished a lengthy, somewhat convoluted explanation of the superiority of Irish wolfhounds over English mastiffs for boar hunting, leaned in conspiratorially. "Duke," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I must impart a word of caution." Edward raised an eyebrow, intrigued by Finch's uncharacteristic solemnity. "Indeed, Finch, what dire secret has the Tun unearthed now?" Lord Finch wrung his hands, his gaze darting around the opulent dining room as if expecting to be overheard. It's about the Hastings, Duke. Specifically, Lady Amelia." Edward felt a sudden tightening in his chest, a jolt of unwelcome recognition. "What about her?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "She is a dangerous connection, Duke," Finch stammered, his face pale. "The animosity between your families, it runs deep. Generations, Duke, generations. My grandfather, God rest his soul, always warned against any mingling of the Beaumonts and the Hastings, said it would bring nothing but ruin." He lowered his voice even further. "There are whispers, Duke, whispers of a burgeoning understanding between you and Lady Amelia. It would be ill-advised, very ill-advised, for both your sakes. Her family, they are fiercely protective, and yours, well, your aunt, she is a formidable woman, Duke. And the Duke of Beaumont cannot afford such a scandal, not with the need for an heir looming so large." Edward stared at him, a knot forming in his stomach. The casual encounters, the stolen glances, the quiet conversations, they hadn't been as private as he'd believed. The invisible threads of society, ever watchful, had already begun to weave their insidious net. Finch's words, though delivered with a trembling timidity, were a stark reminder of the chasm that separated him from Amelia. The weight of his name, his title, his ancestors, pressed down on him, a crushing burden that threatened to extinguish the nascent flame of his desire. The oppressive summer air, thick with the scent of damp earth and late-blooming roses, finally broke. A sudden deluge, heavy and unyielding, descended upon the meticulously manicured gardens of Lord Ashworth's estate. Edward, having escaped the stifling ballroom and his aunt's eagle eye for a solitary stroll, found himself caught in the downpour, the sudden chill a sharp contrast to his agitated mind. He sprinted towards the nearest shelter, a white wrought-iron gazebo draped in climbing hydrangeas, its intricate latticework offering a fragile promise of dryness. He was not alone. Lady Amelia, her deep blue gown now speckled with dark drops, stood silhouetted against the sheets of rain, her back to him. Her hair, the rich chestnut he'd come to recognize, was slightly dishevelled, a few tendrils escaping their pins to frame her elegant neck. The sight of her, unexpected and utterly captivating, stole the air from his lungs. He cleared his throat, the sound a clumsy intrusion in the sudden quiet of their shared refuge. Amelia started, turning sharply, her eyes widening in surprise, before a soft smile touched her lips. "Lord Edward," she murmured, her voice a low melody that resonated through the drumming rain. "A rather dramatic entrance, even for you." Edward felt an unbidden warmth spread through him. "Lady Amelia, it appears we both sought refuge from nature's sudden temper." He gestured to the relentless downpour beyond the gazebo's delicate archways. "Though I fear it intends to keep us captive for some time." "Indeed." She turned back to watch the rain, a thoughtful expression on her face. "There's a strange beauty in it, isn't there?" The world stripped bare, if only for a moment. He found himself simply observing her, the way the light caught the delicate curve of her cheek, the gentle rise and fall of her chest with each breath. She was utterly without artifice, a stark contrast to the carefully constructed personas he encountered daily. "I confess, I often prefer the solitude of a good book to the cacophony of a ballroom," Amelia said, breaking the silence, though her eyes remained fixed on the rain. "Are you a reader, Lord Edward?" Edward, startled from his reverie, shifted slightly. "I am, though my duties often leave little time for such indulgences." He thought of the heavy tomes on estate management and political treatises that filled his study, a stark contrast to the vivid narratives he imagined she devoured. "What sort of books do you favour, Lady Amelia?" She finally turned, her gaze meeting his, and he felt a familiar jolt. Stories of adventure, of far-off lands, of hearts that defy expectation, she confessed, a hint of wistfulness in her tone. "And poetry, of course. Do you ever dream, Lord Edward?" "Not of responsibilities or lineage, but of something entirely your own." The question hung in the air, potent and personal. He thought of the suffocating weight of his title, of Aunt Agatha's pronouncements, of Finch's warnings. He thought of the hollow feeling that had settled in his chest since their last encounter. I confess I often find myself dreaming of things perhaps best left unarticulated," he admitted, a rare vulnerability in his voice. "Things that might be considered imprudent." A knowing look flickered in her eyes, a shared understanding that transcended their spoken words. The air between them, already charged, thickened. He wanted to reach out, to trace the line of her jaw, to feel the warmth of her skin. The urge was a physical ache, a burning hunger he'd never known before. His hands, usually so confident, felt clumsy and superfluous at his sides. He clenched them, digging his nails into his palms, a self-imposed restraint against the audacious impulse. Imprudence can sometimes be the most honest path, Amelia said softly, her voice barely audible above the rain. Her eyes held his, and in their depths he saw not judgment, but a nascent understanding, a shared yearning. The world outside the gazebo seemed to fade, reduced to a blurry watercolour of greens and greys. Here, within this small, enclosed space, their family's ancient feud, the societal expectations, the whispers of scandal, all of it ceased to exist. There was only the rhythmic drumming of the rain, the scent of wet earth, and the undeniable pull between them, a silent current that threatened to overwhelm them both. He swallowed, his throat dry. "And what of your dreams, Lady Amelia?" he asked, his voice rougher than he intended. "Do they also reside in the realm of the imprudent?" A faint blush rose on her cheeks, lending her an even more exquisite beauty. She lowered her gaze, then met his once more, her expression unreadable. "Perhaps," she whispered, the single word an invitation, a challenge, a tantalizing promise. The rain showed no signs of abating. Time, within the small sanctuary of the gazebo, seemed to stretch and warp, each shared breath a heightened experience. Edward felt as though he stood on a precipice, one step away from a plunge into an unknown, exhilarating abyss. His control, usually absolute, was fraying at the edges, stretched taut by her mere presence. He wanted to confess everything, to tell her of the emptiness of his life before her, of the desperate hope she had ignited. But the words, so close to his lips, remained unspoken, held back by a lifetime of ingrained duty and the chilling reality of their family's intractable animosity. For now, the silent intimacy of the gazebo and the unspoken language between them would have to suffice. Whispers and warnings. The clinking of teacups and the low murmur of conversation usually formed a soothing backdrop to Lady Dunstan's afternoon socials. But today, a sharp edge of intrigue sliced through the air. Mr. Davies, a man whose sole talent lay in the art of polite malice, held court in a corner, his voice hushed, but carrying just enough to pique curiosity. "And did you hear?" he began, a smirk playing on his thin lips as he addressed a small, captivated circle of ladies, "that our dashing Duke of Ashworth has developed a particular fondness for the literary arts, or perhaps a particular lady with a fondness for them." His gaze flickered meaningfully towards Lady Hastings's absent daughter. A ripple of knowing glances spread amongst the women, their fans fluttering faster. "Lady Amelia, you mean?" whispered one, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and delight. "But the Hastings?" Mr. Davies leaned in conspiratorially. "Indeed." It seems a certain gazebo in the rain proved quite the setting for an impromptu poetry recital. Or so I am told. He paused, allowing the implication to hang heavy in the air, a perfectly crafted barb designed to wound. One does hope Lord Edward remembers his station and the rather inconvenient history between the houses. Edward, who had arrived late, found himself navigating a sudden shift in the room's atmosphere. Heads turned subtly as he passed, whispers dying down only to reignite with renewed vigour once his back was turned. He felt eyes upon him, not merely admiring, but dissecting, judging. The usual warm smiles of acquaintance now held a brittle quality, a hint of something conspiratorial behind them. He caught snippets of conversation. The Hastings girl, quite imprudent. His aunt will be furious. A knot of unease tightened in his stomach. The innocent refuge of the gazebo, the shared words, the unspoken understanding. It had all seemed so private, so insulated from the prying eyes of society. Yet, here it was, laid bare and twisted, a whisper campaign gaining momentum. Later that evening, the heavy oak door of his study clicked shut with a decisive finality that brooked no argument. Aunt Agatha, a formidable woman whose presence commanded attention even in the quietest rooms, stood before the fireplace, her silhouette stark against the dying light. Her silver hair, usually meticulously pinned, seemed to bristle with an unspoken fury. "Edward," she began, her voice low but piercing, "we need to speak. Immediately." He braced himself. He knew that tone. It was the same one she used when addressing a disobedient stable boy or a tradesman who dared to be late. "Aunt Agatha," he replied, attempting a casual air that felt utterly false even to his own ears. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Her eagle eyes, sharp and unwavering, fixed upon him. "Pleasure? There is no pleasure in this, Edward. Only profound disappointment and a growing sense of alarm." She moved closer, her silk gown rustling softly like dry leaves. "The whispers have reached my ears, and they are not merely whispers, they are a cacophony of scandal." Edward's jaw tightened. "Whispers about what, pray tell?" "Do not play the innocent boy," she snapped, her patience clearly wearing thin. "I speak of Lady Amelia Hastings, and your increasingly public displays of interest." She spat the word public as if it were a venomous insect. "A gazebo? Alone? In the rain? Have you completely lost your senses?" He felt a flush creep up his neck. It was merely a coincidence, Aunt. A shared shelter from a storm. "Coincidence? Do not insult my intelligence, Edward," she retorted, her voice rising slightly. "Society does not operate on coincidences, especially not when the Duke of Ashworth and a Hastings daughter are involved. Tongues are wagging, Edward. They are saying you are smitten, that you are pursuing her." "And if I were?" he challenged, a spark of defiance igniting within him. Aunt Agatha's eyes narrowed to slits. "Then you are a fool, a complete and utter fool. Have you forgotten who you are, who we are? The Ashworths and the Hastings have been at odds for centuries. Their bloodline is anathema to ours. It is an insult to everything our family stands for." She swept a hand through the air, encompassing the ancestral portraits that lined the walls. "Your position, your title, your entire inheritance, it is all predicated on upholding the traditions, the alliances, and yes, the animosities of this family." To pursue a Hastings is not merely a youthful indiscretion. It is an act of treason against your own name. Her voice dropped to a chilling whisper. "Do you understand the consequences, Edward? Your reputation will be ruined. Your marriage prospects, those suitable for a duke, will vanish. And if you persist in this folly, your very title could be in jeopardy." There are ways, Edward, for the Crown to intervene when a duke proves himself utterly unfit. The words hung in the air, cold and stark. The warmth of the fire seemed to recede, leaving a sudden chill in the room. He had always known the constraints of his duty, but never before had they felt so absolute, so suffocating. The image of Amelia's gentle smile, her eyes sparkling with shared laughter, flashed in his mind, starkly contrasting with the harsh reality his aunt laid bare. The unspoken intimacy of the gazebo now seemed a dangerous, almost reckless act. Aunt Agatha stepped back, her expression softening infinitesimally, though her resolve remained unbroken. Think, Edward. Think of your legacy. Think of your future. This infatuation, it will lead only to ruin. For you and for that girl. Her final words, laced with a potent mixture of warning and veiled threat, echoed in the sudden silence of the study. Amelia's burden. Amelia felt the weight of her family's gaze before any words were spoken. The drawing room, usually a haven of gentle chatter and the rustle of silk, felt charged with an unspoken accusation. Her mother, Lady Hastings, sat ramrod straight on the velvet settee, her needlework forgotten in her lap. Her father, Lord Hastings, paced before the cold hearth, his hands clasped behind his back, a sure sign of his agitation. "Amelia, dearest," Lady Hastings began, her voice strained, "we must discuss these unfortunate whispers." Amelia's stomach tightened. She knew which whispers they meant. Mr. Davies's pronouncements at Lady Dunstan's soirée had spread like wildfire through the ton, fanned by the very air of impropriety he had conjured. "They speak of you and Lord Edward," Lord Hastings interjected, his voice gruff. "In the gazebo, alone." He stopped pacing, turning to fix his daughter with a stern gaze. "You know the history between our houses, Amelia, Ashworth's and Hastings. It has been thus for generations. This flirtation is beyond reckless." Amelia's cheeks flushed. "It was hardly a flirtation, father. We merely sought shelter from the rain." The memory of Edward's close proximity, the scent of his coat, the spark in his eyes, it was anything but mere. But she dared not confess the true intensity of that moment. "Regardless of your intentions, the perception is what matters," her mother said, her tone laced with fear. "Your reputation, Amelia, is a delicate thing, and ours. We have worked tirelessly to maintain our standing, to secure your sister's prospects. This scandal could unravel it all." Amelia's heart sank. She understood the precariousness of their position. While not impoverished, the Hastings name lacked the immense wealth and ancient lineage of the Ashworths. Their social ascent depended on strategic alliances and impeccable conduct. A perceived impropriety with an Ashworth, of all people, was a direct assault on their carefully constructed world. "You must avoid him, Amelia," Lord Hastings commanded, his voice firm. "Completely. No more shared gazebos, no more lingering glances at assemblies. Act as though he does not exist." The decree felt like a physical blow. The thought of deliberately turning away from Edward, of extinguishing the nascent spark that had ignited between them, filled her with a profound emptiness. She nodded, unable to speak, the weight of their expectations pressing down on her. Later that afternoon, seeking solace, Amelia found herself in the garden, the chill autumn air a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere indoors. Lady Eleanor, a distant cousin and her closest confidant, found her there, her gentle face etched with concern. "Amelia, I heard. I am so sorry, Eleanor murmured, her hand gently touching Amelia's arm. Such cruel gossip. It's monstrous. Amelia offered a weak smile. It's the talk of the town, I'm sure. My parents have made their feelings abundantly clear. They worry for you, Eleanor said softly, and for the family, naturally, but no one truly believes you would act improperly. Do they not? Amelia's voice was barely a whisper. Mr. Davies certainly seemed to believe it, and the way Aunt Agatha looked at me. The image of Edward's formidable aunt, a woman who could freeze a ballroom with a glance, sent a shiver down Amelia's spine. Eleanor squeezed her arm. Aunt Agatha is a formidable woman, but she is also fiercely protective of her family, and Edward is a duke. There are always whispers surrounding such men. Amelia turned to face her friend, her eyes troubled. But it's more than just whispers, Eleanor. When I was with him in the gazebo, it felt different. Not merely a momentary diversion, I felt something. She hesitated, then confessed. And I think he felt it too. Eleanor's expression softened with understanding. Oh, Amelia, that is complicated. Complicated doesn't begin to describe it, Amelia said, a frustrated sigh escaping her lips. My entire life I've been taught to follow the rules, to be proper, to secure a suitable match. And now the one man who makes me feel alive is the one man I am forbidden to even acknowledge. The full weight of her situation crashed upon her. The ancestral feud, the social pressure, her family's anxieties, they formed an impenetrable wall around her nascent feelings for Edward. She was trapped, caught between duty and a longing she barely understood, but which grew stronger with each passing moment. The thought of a life devoid of that spark, a life where she merely existed within the rigid confines of societal expectations, felt utterly unbearable. The scrutiny of the ton, the fear in her parents' eyes, the chilling pronouncements of Aunt Agatha, it all pressed down on her, threatening to extinguish the fragile flame that had ignited within her heart. The subtle murmurs had once been a mere irritant, a low thrum accompanying Amelia through elegant drawing rooms and lively garden parties. Now they had curdled into something far more venomous. Lady Dunstan, a woman whose every syllable seemed weighted with disdain, had paused, mid-sip of her ratafia, at Mrs. Abernathy's afternoon tea. Her eyes, frigid as glacial shards, fixed on some unseen point. Such a lamentable situation for the Ashworths, she'd pronounced, her voice carrying across the room with deliberate clarity, ensuring Amelia, 3 tables away, absorbed every word. Lord Edward, quite ensnared by such transparent machinations, one truly commiserates with him. The insinuation hung heavy, a suffocating shroud. A chill dread coiled in Amelia's gut, predating the full impact of the calumny. It was no longer a vague whisper of impropriety. It was an outright accusation of calculated avarice. A fortune hunter. The phrase, once voiced, seemed to multiply, echoing from every polished surface. A clutch of young ladies, moments before absorbed in a spirited discussion of ribbons, fell silent, their gazes darting towards Amelia, a complex mix of pity and thinly veiled scorn. Later that evening, swathed in the sanctuary of her bedchamber, the full weight of the malicious fabrication descended. More than her reputation was at stake. It was her very essence. To be branded a fortune hunter was to be stripped of all grace, to have her genuine affection for Edward reduced to a base transaction. A profound sorrow gnawed at her heart, a sense of betrayal that extended beyond the gossips to the sheer injustice of it all. Tears, hot and scalding, carved trails down her cheeks as she envisioned Edward's reaction. The potential for this lie to blight whatever fragile blossom they had cultivated. The following afternoon, Edward restlessly patrolled his study, an internal tempest gathering force. The rumour, relayed by an agitated footman who'd overheard it in the servants' quarters, had reached him in a mangled, garbled form. Something concerning Amelia, something about his inheritance. His initial reaction was a fierce surge of protectiveness, a consuming anger that anyone dared to besmirch her name. He'd spent the morning at the gentlemen's club, the familiar drone of conversation punctuated by speculative glances in his direction. Lord Harrington, whose primary occupation was the meticulous curation of scandal, had offered a condescending smirk. "Heard the latest, Edward? Rather unfortunate, wouldn't you say? Lady Amelia, quite the astute young woman." Harrington then proceeded to unfurl the full, unvarnished slander, painting Amelia as a shrewd opportunist, a woman who had targeted him solely for his prosperity and standing. Edward's hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. The club, usually a bastion of measured decorum, suddenly felt like a stifling cage. He yearned to bellow, to strike Harrington, to champion Amelia's honour against every insidious whisper. Yet he knew such a display would only fuel the conflagration, lending credence to the very falsehood he sought to extinguish. He forced a tight-lipped smile, a nonchalant shrug, then excused himself, his mind a maelstrom of indignation. He pictured Amelia, her quiet strength, her discerning eyes, the authentic warmth of her laughter, the slight tremor of her hand in his in the garden. To suggest that she, of all people, was motivated by such base desires was an affront of the highest degree. He knew her heart, recognized the purity of her spirit, and the malevolence of the lie struck him with a visceral blow. Someone was actively seeking her ruination, to dismantle her standing, and by extension, to undermine him. This was no mere idle chatter. It was a deliberate, calculated assault. His thoughts drifted to Mr. Davies, whose unfortunate whispers had ignited the initial spark, and Lady Beatrice, whose high, tinkling laugh had always grated on his nerves. He recalled her overly familiar gestures at the last ball, her persistent attempts to monopolize his attention. Had she, perhaps, perceived Amelia as a rival? The possibility, once a fleeting notion, now solidified into grim certainty. Beatrice had been particularly vocal in her disdain for the Ashworths, especially after Edward had politely, yet firmly, rebuffed her more overt advances. The anger was a searing, consuming blaze, but beneath it, a cold resolve began to take shape. This slander, this vile attack on Amelia could not be endured. He would not permit it. He would unearth the source, expose the deception, and shield Amelia, even if it meant defying every expectation, every societal stricture, and every ancestral obligation. The rules had irrevocably changed. This was no longer merely a forbidden attraction, it was a matter of honour, and Edward Ashworth was prepared to fight for it. The breaking point. The clatter of carriage wheels on the cobbled drive seemed to mock Edward's frayed nerves. Each rotation felt like a fresh twist of the knife, reminding him of Amelia's public humiliation. The image of her face, etched with pain and confusion, was seared into his mind, eclipsing the usually comforting familiarity of Blackwood Manor. He paced the length of his study, a prisoner in his own domain, the scent of old leather and burning logs doing little to soothe the inferno within him. The carefully cultivated calm he usually wore had shattered, replaced by a raw, unyielding fury. He railed internally against the injustice of it all. Amelia, whose spirit shone with such genuine warmth and intelligence, was being dragged through the mud by the very society that lauded itself on its decorum. Fortune hunter. The word echoed in his mind, a venomous whisper. It was a convenient label, of course, for any woman who dared to capture the attention of a man of his standing, particularly one who had so steadfastly resisted matrimony. But this wasn't just idle gossip. This was a calculated, brutal assault on her character, designed to isolate her, to strip her of her dignity. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, who was behind it. Beatrice. Her name was a silent curse on his tongue. The pressure from all sides was immense. His aunt's thinly veiled threats, the constant reminders of his duty, the weight of his ducal responsibilities. They had always been there, a heavy cloak he wore with practiced ease. But now it felt like a suffocating shroud. His position, his title, his legacy, they all demanded a pragmatic, cold-hearted dismissal of Amelia. He was expected to retreat, to allow the scandal to run its course, and to find a more suitable, less complicated match. That was the path of least resistance, the expected ducal response. But the thought of abandoning Amelia, of allowing her to face this calumny alone, sent a shudder of revulsion through him. He saw her in his mind's eye. Her eyes, so often alight with curiosity, now clouded with sorrow. Her gentle smile replaced by a tight, strained line. The thought of her weeping in solitude, her reputation in tatters, was unbearable. He had allowed himself to be swayed by duty and expectation for too long. He had played by their rules, upheld their traditions, and in doing so, had almost lost sight of the man he truly was. A quiet tap at the study door startled him from his reverie. Lord Finch, impeccably dressed as ever, with not a single hair out of place, entered with a stack of scrolls clutched in his gloved hand. Finch, a walking encyclopedia of aristocratic lineages and ancient feuds, was often a source of exasperation, but today Edward found a perverse comfort in his presence. "Your Grace," Finch began, his voice a soft rustle, "I have taken the liberty of reviewing some historical documents. Regarding the Montagues and the Ashworths, that is." He cleared his throat, adjusting his spectacles. "The animosity, as you know, runs deep. Centuries of land disputes, a duel or two, and a most unfortunate incident involving a disputed horse during the reign of George II. Edward waved a dismissive hand. "Finch, spare me the ancient history lesson. I am well aware of the animosity, as you call it. It's precisely that animosity that is being weaponized against Lady Amelia as we speak." Finch nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Indeed. Which is why I must reiterate, Your Grace, the prudence of caution. Lady Amelia, while undoubtedly charming, represents a significant deviation from the customary alliances. The whispers in the drawing rooms grow louder. There are those who believe this attachment could jeopardize your standing." Edward walked to the window, staring out at the darkening landscape, the skeletal trees silhouetted against the bruised sky. "Let them whisper. Let them believe what they wish." He turned, his eyes burning with an uncharacteristic intensity that startled Finch. "I am done with caution, Finch. Done with prudence. I am done with allowing my life to be dictated by ancient feuds and societal expectations." Finch blinked, momentarily speechless, his scrolls nearly slipping from his grasp. "Your Grace, surely you jest. The ducal title, the estates, the very future of your line. These are not trifles to be cast aside for a fleeting fancy. This is no fleeting fancy, Finch, Edward retorted, his voice low and dangerous. This is a woman whose honour is being publicly savaged, and I will not stand by and watch it happen. He walked closer to Finch, his presence commanding. I will not allow Amelia to be sacrificed on the altar of my family's history, or by the malicious machinations of those who seek to control me. Finch, usually so composed, looked genuinely alarmed. But, Your Grace, the consequences could be dire. Your aunt, Lady Beatrice, she wields considerable influence. Edward's jaw tightened. Then let her wield it. I have tolerated her interference for too long. I will not have Amelia suffer for my cowardice. He took a deep breath, the decision solidifying within him, a cornerstone laid in the shifting sands of his life. I will protect her, Finch, no matter the cost, and I will expose the truth behind these rumours, no matter who is implicated. Finch stared at him, a complex mix of apprehension and grudging admiration in his usually impassive eyes. And what, pray tell, is the cost you are willing to bear, Your Grace? Edward met his gaze, his resolve unshakable. Everything, Finch. If it comes to it, everything. The Grand Declaration. The grand ball shimmered with an almost ethereal light, chandeliers dripping crystal tears onto a sea of polished marble. 1,000 candles flickered, their golden glow reflecting in the silks and satins that adorned the city's elite. Laughter, tinkling and shallow, mingled with the strains of a soaring string quartet. Every titled lady, every ambitious gentleman, every aging dowager with a hawk's eye for scandal was present. The air hung thick with the scent of jasmine and ambition. Amelia, a lone star in a sky full of constellations, stood near a wide archway, her gown of deep emerald velvet a stark contrast to the frothy pastels surrounding her. Her gaze drifted across the room, observing the intricate dance of social manoeuvring, a world she now felt utterly alien to. She saw Aunt Agatha's formidable profile across the room, her lips a thin, disapproving line as her eyes, like a viper's, flickered in Amelia's direction. Lady Beatrice, a vision in icy blue, held court by the refreshment tables, her smile a brittle mask that didn't quite reach her eyes. Amelia knew, with a chilling certainty, that Beatrice was the architect of her recent public torment, a vindictive response to Edward's unspoken allegiance. A sudden hush fell over the room, a collective intake of breath that rippled outwards from the grand entrance. Heads turned as one, conversations dying mid-sentence. All eyes fixated on the towering figure who now stood framed in the archway, his dark hair falling artfully over his brow, his usually impeccable cravat slightly askew. Lord Edward. He was not merely entering, he was making an entrance, a silent, powerful assertion of his presence. He looked neither left nor right, his gaze cutting a path through the throng, directly, unwaveringly, towards Amelia. Whispers, like dry leaves scuttling across a pavement, began to rustle through the silence. Aunt Agatha's jaw tightened, her knuckles white as she gripped the fan in her hand. Lady Beatrice, mid-sip of her champagne, faltered, a tiny tremor running through her perfectly composed facade. Edward moved with the unstoppable force of a tide, pushing past startled debutantes and stiff-backed dukes. He ignored the gasps, the averted glances, the calculating stares. His eyes, dark and resolute, were fixed solely on Amelia. Amelia's heart hammered against her ribs, a wild drumbeat of anticipation and trepidation. The air around her crackled with an almost tangible energy. She felt every eye in the room upon her, 1,000 judgments silently hurled. Yet, as Edward drew nearer, the cacophony of the room faded, replaced by the singular thrum of his approach. He reached her, stopping just inches away, his presence eclipsing all else. He took her hand, his touch a jolt of fire through her veins, and raised it to his lips, his gaze never leaving hers. Then, in a voice that resonated through the cavernous ballroom, clear and strong enough to silence the remaining murmurs, Edward spoke. "My lords, ladies, and gentlemen," he began, his voice laced with an authority that left no room for dissent. "You have no doubt all heard the baseless whispers, the malicious fabrications that have unfortunately been allowed to circulate regarding Lady Amelia Ashworth." His eyes swept over the room, pausing pointedly on Aunt Agatha, then lingering for a fraction of a second on Lady Beatrice. "I speak of the initial spark, as Mr. Davies so eloquently put it, that sought to diminish her character and cast a shadow over her name." A palpable tension filled the room, the silence now absolute, punctuated only by the distant scrape of a chair. Edward squeezed Amelia's hand, a silent reassurance. "Let me be unequivocally clear. Lady Amelia Ashworth is a woman of unparalleled integrity, grace, and courage. She is, moreover, a woman I love with every fibre of my being." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Faces paled, fans dropped, and a few dowagers clutched their chests as if struck. Edward's voice, however, remained unwavering. "I have spent too long bound by antiquated notions of duty and rivalry, allowing circumstance to dictate my heart. No longer. I stand before you tonight, not merely as the Duke of Ashworth, but as a man who chooses his own path, a man who chooses his own beloved." He turned fully to Amelia, his eyes burning with an incandescent light. "Amelia," he said, his voice softer now, yet still carrying to every corner of the room. "I know that my family's name has been set against yours for generations. I know that the world around us demands we remain apart. But I defy it all. I choose you. I will protect you, cherish you, and stand by your side no matter the cost. My title, my lands, my very future, none of it holds any meaning without you by my side. I would sacrifice it all, willingly and without regret, to call you mine." He lowered his head, not in shame, but in profound earnestness, and kissed her hand once more, a tender, resolute gesture that sealed his declaration. The silence that followed was deafening, a vacuum where the world had just been remade. Every eye in the room, from the highest peer to the lowliest footman, was fixed on them, bearing witness to a love that had just declared war on society itself. Aftermath and choice. A collective gasp, a tangible force swept through the ballroom, rattling crystal, trembling champagne flutes, and stealing the very breath from every guest. Aunt Agatha, her formidable profile stark against the ducal hall's opulence, seemed carved from glacial ice. Her jaw, usually a haven for polite smiles, was now a rigid line. Knuckles blanched as she clutched her silk fan. Her usually discerning gaze, ever alert for impropriety, was now locked on Edward and Amelia, unblinking, the silent shriek of a prophet witnessing sacrilege, a tableau of utter betrayal. The waltz, moments before a sprightly cascade, had evaporated into an uneasy hush. Every eye, from the lowliest footman to the most august earl, was riveted on the couple at the floor's heart. Edward, his hands still enfolding Amelia's, remained oblivious to the sudden void of sound, the palpable atmospheric shift. His world had contracted to the woman before him, her features a tapestry of disbelief and dawning wonder. "Edward!" Aunt Agatha's voice, when it finally shattered the spell, was a sharp, brittle shard of sound, venomous disbelief piercing the stunned quiet. It was less a question than an indictment, a desperate plea for him to retract the words that had just splintered their carefully constructed reality. Edward slowly turned, his stance radiating unyielding resolve. His eyes, however, never truly left Amelia's. It was a wordless exchange, a profound affirmation of his choice. In that unwavering gaze, Amelia perceived not merely his love, but his impending sacrifice. She saw the ducal coronet, shimmering with centuries of tradition and duty, slowly slipping from his grasp. She envisioned sprawling estates, the ancestral seat, the very foundation of his birthright, all laid at her feet. And in his eyes, she understood he found the exchange more than equitable. A faint tremor ran through Amelia. This was no grand romantic gesture from a novel. It was raw, audacious, terrifyingly real. A defiance that would echo through drawing rooms and whispered confidences for months, perhaps years. She felt the crushing weight of every disapproving stare, every shocked inhalation, as if they were physical blows. Yet, an exhilarating surge of something akin to liberation coursed through her. Edward, now confronting his aunt, tightened his grip on Amelia's hand, a silent warning to his family, a public declaration. "Aunt Agatha," he said, his voice calm amidst the brewing tempest, "I believe I made myself clear." His tone held no aggression, only a quiet, absolute certainty that brooked no argument. Aunt Agatha's face flushed a mottled crimson, her indignation battling a desperate attempt at aristocratic composure. You cannot possibly mean this, Edward," she stammered, her voice escalating. "Think of your standing, your title, the family name." Edward's gaze swept across the bewildered faces of his kin, then returned to his aunt, his expression softening almost imperceptibly as he addressed her directly. "My standing," he declared, each word deliberate, "is with Lady Amelia. My title, if it is to separate us, then it holds little value to me." A collective intake of breath rustled through the room like dry leaves. It was an astonishing pronouncement, a renunciation of everything he had been groomed for since birth. For generations, the Dukes of Ashworth had prioritized duty, lineage, and their name above all else. Edward had just, with a few stark words, shredded that sacred doctrine. He felt the familiar tendrils of ancestral expectation try to coil around him, the phantom weight of the ducal coronet pressing on his brow. He saw the disapproving portraits of his forefathers lining the walls, their stern visages seemingly condemning his choice. For a fleeting moment, a sliver of doubt, a whisper of the comfortable, predictable life he was abandoning, tried to worm its way into his resolve. But then he looked at Amelia, truly looked at her, saw the vulnerable strength in her eyes, the subtle tremor in her hand, and the doubt evaporated like mist in the morning sun. He had always chafed under the strictures of his birth, the endless expectations, the gilded cage of his privilege. Now, standing here, on the precipice of losing it all, he felt a strange, profound sense of liberation. The ducal title, once a defining aspect of his identity, now seemed a trivial bauble compared to the incandescent connection he shared with Amelia. The thought of a life without her, a life of duty without joy, felt like a slow, agonizing death. The thought of sacrificing the title for her, however, felt like coming alive. "I understand the implications," Edward continued, his voice resonating with a previously latent authority. "And I accept them." The words hung in the air, a final, irrevocable statement. He was choosing, and the choice was Amelia. A new beginning. The collective gasp of the ballroom still echoed in Edward's ears, a symphony of scandal and disbelief. But it was a distant sound, muted by the powerful thrum of Amelia's hand in his. Their fingers intertwined, a silent pledge made manifest as they walked past the frozen, aghast faces. Aunt Agatha's furious, mottled complexion was a blur, the disapproving stares of lords and ladies a hazy periphery. All that truly existed was the warmth of Amelia's palm, the gentle pressure of her grip, and the resolute beat of his own heart. They moved as one, a singular entity carving a path through the stunned crowd. The grand doors of the ducal residence, once a symbol of his gilded cage, now loomed as a gateway to liberation. The liveried footmen, usually impassive, dared to meet their eyes, their expressions a mix of shock and nascent understanding. Edward offered them a curt nod, a silent farewell to a life he was willingly shedding. The cool night air hit them first, a refreshing balm after the stifling heat of the ballroom. Then came the rain, not a gentle sprinkle, but a sudden, insistent downpour, as if the heavens themselves had decided to punctuate their dramatic exit. It slicked the cobblestones, turned the gaslight halos into blurry smudges, and plastered tendrils of Amelia's dark hair to her temples. She didn't flinch, didn't pull away. Instead, she tilted her head back slightly, letting the droplets kiss her face, a faint smile playing on her lips. "A storm," she murmured, her voice barely audible above the drumming rain, yet perfectly clear to Edward. "How fitting." He squeezed her hand. "Perhaps the world is weeping for my lost title," he quipped, a lightness in his tone that surprised even himself. He felt no grief, no regret, only an exhilarating sense of freedom. Amelia laughed, a soft, melodic sound that chased away the last vestiges of the ballroom's oppressive atmosphere. "Or perhaps," she countered, her eyes sparkling, "it is cheering for a new beginning." They hurried down the wide stone steps, the rain soaking through their clothes, but neither seemed to notice or care. Their carriage, a modest hired hack Edward had prearranged, awaited at the end of the drive, its driver huddled beneath a large umbrella. The footman, accustomed to the grand ducal equipage, watched them go, their expressions unreadable in the dim light. Inside the carriage, the relative quiet was profound. The rhythmic clatter of hooves on wet cobblestones and the steady drumming of rain against the roof created a cocoon around them. Edward pulled a lap rug over Amelia's knees, though his own coat was dripping. He leaned back, letting out a long, contented breath. "Are you cold?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Amelia turned to him, her eyes luminous in the dim light filtering through the rain-streaked windows. "Only a little," she admitted, a shiver running through her. "But I wouldn't trade this chill for all the warmth of that ballroom." He reached out, his thumb gently tracing the line of her jaw, feeling the dampness of her skin. "I meant every word, Amelia. Every single one." She covered his hand with hers, her gaze unwavering. "I know, Edward, and I believe you." A pause, then a wistful sigh. It's a terrifying prospect, isn't it? To have no title, no wealth beyond what you can earn, no grand estate. It is, he agreed, a genuine smile spreading across his face. Terrifyingly liberating. For the first time, I feel truly myself. Not Lord Edward, Duke of Windsor, but simply Edward, a man who loves you, and only you. Amelia's eyes welled up, but no tears fell. And I, Amelia, simply Amelia, who loves you. She leaned her head against his shoulder, her damp hair brushing his cheek. What will we do, Edward? Where will we go? He wrapped an arm around her, pulling her closer. I have some funds set aside, enough to start somewhere. Perhaps London, away from the gossip and the expectations. Or even further afield, if you wished it. He felt a thrill at the prospect, an adventure he'd never imagined undertaking. A small house, a quiet life. We'll make our own way, Amelia. Without titles, without ancestral lands, we'll build something real, something of our own choosing. She looked up at him, her face alight with an emotion he couldn't quite name, a mixture of hope and wonder. To be free of it all, she whispered. No more rivalries, no more judging eyes, no more endless expectations. A genuine smile bloomed on her face. It sounds exhilarating. Dangerous, perhaps, but exhilarating nonetheless. Are you afraid? He asked gently, brushing a damp curl from her forehead. She considered this for a moment. A little, she confessed. But more than that, I am hopeful. I've always dreamed of a life less constrained, less dictated by lineage and propriety. To truly live, Edward, to truly choose one's own path. Her eyes met his, and the depth of her longing was clear. This is a chance to be authentic, to create our own destiny, together. He felt a surge of profound tenderness, a fierce protectiveness that transcended all he had ever known. This woman, with her quiet strength and her dreams of genuine living, was more precious than any ducal coronet. Then that is what we shall do, he vowed, his voice firm, resolute. We will face whatever comes, Amelia, together, and we will build a life that is truly ours. The carriage rattled on through the stormy night, carrying them away from one life and towards another, an uncharted future brimming with both uncertainty and the boundless promise of their shared love. The rain continued to fall, washing away the old world, making way for the new.